So let's start with some simple principle. Usually we tend to think that the color is just like an extra piece of layer and information on top of an image. But the thing is that it actually can bring many different types of dynamics and information and extra like compositional elements to the table. So let's have a look at what is basically the impact of colors on perception. There are basically four things that can happen when you switch from black and white to color. Color can bring extra information. So just having like the idea of what are the colors that I'm looking at. It can bring extra dynamics. So it can like actually change the way you look at an image. It can also bring change in the relationship between objects in the scene. If you start seeing that objects have the same color, you will start to relate them together. This is like related to Gestalt law of grouping. And one last thing is that color can bring a change in the mood. So let's have a look at some simple example. Here you have one photograph by Thibaut Cuisset, where you can see that you have, in terms of values, something that is very homogeneous and not that much contrast. You have these different areas with like pine trees, and then you have this sort of like more open meadows, etc. Everything is a bit quite bright because it's an overcast weather. What we want to see now in color is that actually there's a lot of saturation and the mood is actually less dark than what we thought, because we have like very saturated colors. So everything is actually almost joyful, even though this is a very gray weather. Here is another example of a cascade or a falling water photograph, where you can see that we have something very interesting with like very strong contrast, where everything like a GAC or like a greatest area of contrast is happening along the cascade, which is very, very nice. And there's nothing more happening. I mean, it's a nice image. There's a like interesting motion, downward motion and things like this. But what is interesting is that once we switch it to color, we actually have this new information of this sort of like rainbow happening that is completely changing the perception of the image, because something that was quite dark and very, let's say, simple, suddenly has a completely different dimension and has like a whole lot more, let's say, like meaning, and some sort of looks way more special than it used to. Here we have another photograph that is quite like simple as well. We have this sort of visible artificial lighting where everything is like bathed in light, and we have those people that are scattered in the scene. So something very simple. And yet what is interesting is that once we switch to color, we have this sort of like greenish tint or tone in the image. And we know that green has like this sort of like weird feeling, in the sense that it's not something very, well, it's something natural, but in terms of lighting, it's not something that always refers to more stuff like being sick or like whatever. It's like, it has a sort of negative feeling. So it's interesting to see that once you switch from something that is bathed in light and that could be very like joyful, as soon as you have like a color that is actually a little bit more like towards the cold colors, it actually does feel like a more negative image, if I may say. Here's another example with a project by Dominique Coulon, where you have this very simple image. You can see that you have like difference in values, and you can tell that there's going to be some play with it, potentially play with colors, but everything in terms of value you can see is quite homogeneous. Like the wall on the left is actually the same as the sky. We just have a play with values on the ground. What is interesting is that as soon as we go into colors, we have like very saturated colors. We have new relationships that are created with the sky, etc. And we have like a completely different perception, because we have like contrasting colors as well with the vegetation. Colors can also create new dynamics. So here we have a painting by Joseph Wright of Derby, where you can see that our GAC, or like greatest area of contrast, is actually around moon, that is right in the dead center of the painting. Nothing, well, I wouldn't say nothing much is happening, because as soon as you start like looking at around the image, you can see that there are like other nice details, etc. But as soon as you put it into color, you can see that there's actually a big color contrast on the right. And that is happening because of the eruption of the volcano that is on the right, that you can't really notice in black and white, because the values are not that, the contrast in value is not that strong, but the contrast in hue is very strong. So it means that going from black and white to color, we actually completely shift the attention of our eyes, and we shift our attention towards the right of the painting. In here, an image of Jules Schulman, a photograph, We can switch from this idea of homogeneity to new relationship. Here we have a lot of things happening. It's like case study house in Los Angeles. And what is happening is that we have this kid and the mother doing stuff in the back, on the courtyard or in the garden. And there's not like really a lot happening. The values are very like, let's say, balanced, and there's no like really thing that really stand out except the people, if we consider that people are like kind of the subject of the image. What happens though when we put the image in color is that we start creating relationships between elements. We have the lady that is holding like yellow flowers, we have the chair that is yellow as well, and we have some yellow elements on the table like flowers on the right. We even have the kid that is blonde that is like some sort of a saturated yellow. So we have a new relationship created between those 3 or even 4 elements, and that contrasts with the rest of the image that is quite desaturated. So basically, color is not a simple extra layer of information. It is a core component of how we read and experience images. So the more contrast your colors bring, the more they impact your composition. The more like information they will bring, the more they will actually impact the composition. So even if you have like a strong JAC, you can actually sort of not even bypass, but like counteract the power of light by having like very strong color contrast. So this is why you actually need to keep an eye on unwanted effects from colors. Whereas like anywhere you're creating like very strong contrast with your colors that counteract the strong contrast that you created with light, and you actually don't want this, you actually really have to keep an eye on it in order to correct it and reduce the contrast that is happening with the colors. And we'll see the different types of contrast in another video. So that will be it for basically the actual power of what is happening when you're switching from black and white to color.